Hi, I'm VanderZyl with Scheer Partners. I'm standing here in the heart of Johns Hopkins Medical and Research Campus in Baltimore, which has been established as an emerging life science hub. We're about to go inside to the FastForward incubator, providing shared laboratory space and equipment to early stage companies in the life science space. Let's go meet their team. So Mark, we're here in Baltimore. Utz chips, crab cakes, biotech.
Crab cakes and football.
And football, right? Go Ravens.
Yeah.
Shout out to the Sox.
Thank you. Purple Friday.
Purple Friday. But we're sitting here at FastForward, and I think a lot of folks know about an incubator. A lot of folks know about, or hear about rather, biotechnology and how companies are incubated. But what is FastForward and how does it differ from what else you see out there?
Yeah, no, that's fair. And we get that question all the time. And I think we've often described ourselves as an innovation hub. And I don't know if there's an agreed upon nomenclature or like a standard definition of what an incubator is versus an accelerator, but we're kind of all of those things. So Hopkins Engineering School about 10 years ago started leasing office and laboratory space near campus to startups. So we started as a facility. And I think that's the most tangible thing. And what most people have in their mind is there's a physical building. You're sitting in one right now. But once that space filled up, because the demand was there, other inventors and entrepreneurs came to us and said, I know your space is full, but can you help me? Can you help me write a business plan? Can you help me pitch an investor? Can you help me get a grant or recruit people to my team? And so FastForward has expanded to be a more programmatic, all-encompassing support of entrepreneurship.
So there's a heavy lab component to FastForward. Your team realized that there was a scarcity of space in the market and really a commodity within Baltimore for scientific companies and startups. So tell us a little bit more about what your offerings are here and how companies can take advantage.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier why it may be appealing to entrepreneurs to be in the same physical space, regardless of technology area, just for that shared community feeling and shared resources and being all in the same place and not feeling so alone. But with biotech and lab-based companies in particular, the physical space needs are often more complex, more expensive, more time-consuming. I remember a founder talking about how long it took just to get internet hooked up at their new space. Imagine all the delays and costs of getting a laboratory space set up. So we were hoping we could remove a barrier to entry. If funding is challenging for all companies at whatever scale, and finding space and developing and building it out is challenging, what if we could get more companies to launch and get started by removing that barrier to entry? So we built flexible laboratory spaces, subsidize the costs. We do chemical waste and hazardous waste removal. We have over $1 million of shared instruments here that are included in the subsidized rent. So we wanted to do that to allow a lab researcher to come in, bring their consumables and get to work. We've done it as quickly as 10 days. That was one time we had a company tell me, wait, I need space, I need it like yesterday, and actually get them in and working in the laboratory environment.
And these days, the name of the game is speed to market. And so finding that move-in ready space that has existing equipment, an established ecosystem, complementary programming is really all a value add. And I think something that FastForward has done a tremendous job in really scaling between your locations. Hopkins is well known, I think, throughout the region, certainly nationally and internationally, given the research and the level of technology that's spinning out, right? And so you hear a lot about commercialization and entrepreneurship and bridging the valley of death and technology readiness levels, right? And I think a lot of that is well established and well known. But when you think of Baltimore as an emerging biotech or life science hub, given the inflows of NIH funding, given the level of research and what's happening here, kind of in this cluster, if you will, where would you say Baltimore is today in terms of is it early innings? Is it late innings? Yeah. Where are we in its evolution?
No, I think that's a good question too. historically haven't been necessarily at the forefront of commercializing or applying the research that's been generated in this area. I think we're blessed with a lot of research funding, as you mentioned, and a lot of innovation. So I'm thankful that we don't have to necessarily encourage that. That's been ongoing for decades, generations. But I think this part of the region historically had been a lot of larger employers, university researchers, government agencies, and not as much in the concentration of entrepreneurship, investment capital, that type of like real estate development, et cetera. So I think we could still be described as maybe an emerging market, but one that's blessed with two, in particularly Baltimore, with the universities that are here, two massively funded university research environments. And there's over 30 private incubator co-working accelerator spaces just in Baltimore City alone. So while it's not maybe as well known for that, there is a saturation of talent and investment capital going on right now. So where we're not necessarily just getting started.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we talk about what are the demand drivers or what really is moving a market, you look at core markets like Boston, really Cambridge, given Harvard and MIT, you look at Southern California. I mean, we think about it in terms of, kind of four key pillars, right? It's access to talent and research. It's intellectual property and technology that's able to commercialize. It's access to private capital and venture, which is a big piece of what drives the life science ecosystem. And then it's facilities and it's infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
And so with just under 2.5 million square feet of what we consider to be life science infrastructure, and obviously you have projects like 4MLK with Wexford and the University of Maryland and the biopark that's going to help kind of bolster that. But there seems to be, to me at least, through our due diligence and conversation, sort of supply and demand imbalance. And certainly on the supply side, because it is constrained, leads to higher rental rates. It leads to, the choices that companies have to make. Do I stay here or do I go somewhere else? I mean, we talked about it earlier. On the Amtrak, it's a quick train ride to Philadelphia, which has emerged as this fantastic cell and gene therapy center given UPenn and Children's Hospital, among other things. And so, why should someone want to be in Baltimore versus going to Montgomery County versus going to Philadelphia versus going to Boston?
Yeah, and I think there's a different appeal to being in different locations, and some people will like that more suburban development area or a more urban environment. Proximity to where the technology originated is often a driving factor. If you look at Philadelphia and UPenn, or even Pittsburgh with Carnegie Mellon and Pitt up there, or if you look at the institutions like you mentioned in the Boston area or Southern California, I think there's a big appeal to be near where the inventions occurred and where the inventors still are. Here at Hopkins, typically our inventors, of which we're blessed with a lot, we see between 400 and 500 reports of invention annually in our office, which puts us among the most prolific universities in the country, probably globally. Most of our inventors remain at the university, stay on as faculty. And if there's a startup that spins out of their research, they are likely in an advisory capacity. They may be a scientific advisor board or a more casual mentor, or early days, maybe more hands-on, but later kind of transition out. But those early days of the company, being nearby the invention, be nearby the inventor and where that there's a real appeal to that. I was in Research Triangle Park last year, and I toured facilities in Durham, and there's a heavy appeal to be across the street from the Duke labs or the Duke researchers, and I think you'll see that around the country. So that's one of the appeals of being in Baltimore, is being near, let's say, a place like University of Maryland or Johns Hopkins. And there's also, depending on what the workforce wants, from a livability standpoint, would you want to be near more restaurants and dining and shopping and attractions, or do you prefer to be in a more suburban setting? Now, I happen to live in the county, but it's not that far, right? And it's not that arduous of a commute in the morning. So Baltimore is a very livable area in terms of cost of living and the traffic compared to some of the other metro areas. We had a startup founder who was working in one of our early iterations of this space, who had previously launched companies in San Francisco. And he said that the salary that he could pay some of his early hires in Baltimore would allow them to purchase a home, which is not feasible in San Francisco, right? So I'd often say, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that the money will go farther in a place like this as well. The cost of real estate is not quite as high as some of the other urban environments. And then when you compare urban to rural, I think then you have to look at the trade-offs of cost, price per square foot versus ease of commute, access to other amenities, livability, et cetera. So, our hope is that we can bring talent and investment to this area and make it a more viable option to more entrepreneurs and companies. And we can be a real driver of that economic development locally.
Yeah, absolutely. And so talking about talent for a second here, obviously large scientific pipeline in terms of technical talent and expertise within the Johns Hopkins umbrella, certainly within the geographic density of, let's say, the greater Washington region, just given the amount of university presence, even not necessarily home-based here, right? You have in DC a big public policy push. Yeah. Hopkins just announced, a couple of years ago that they're gonna renovate the museum downtown, and we talked a little bit about that. But when you think about talent, at least when I think about it, I think there's a little bit of a distinction. It's access to the technical talent, but I think even more importantly is access to executive talent. Yeah. Those that can take an idea through commercialization, through clinical trials, and really begin to monetize it. I mean, the number of companies that are in Baltimore arguably are pre-revenue in nature, and maybe arguably within FastForward as well. And so talk to me a little bit about the level of executive talent that you see in Baltimore.
Yeah. I've heard one person call a CEO the current executive officer, which I thought was great. And I kind of want to steal that while giving credit. But I think there's a role for that executive talent at different stages of development of that company. And we often need someone to be the 0 to 1 operator, executive, managing a project, because in my estimation, at the core level of a company, you're going to need a plan, a team to execute on that plan, and resources. And
including facilities, right?
Yeah, but that's a pretty overly simplistic way to look at it, but I think those are core components. And sometimes you need to get one on board to get the other and then the other. And it's not a catch-22, but it's sort of a balance to try to do that. In this area, we do have a more concentration of the more researcher or more technical workforce historically than, let's say, the quote-unquote serial entrepreneur or the person who's taken multiple companies forward. But there has been a real effort on our part and others to align talent to opportunities, as well as to coach and groom the next wave of talent. I sometimes joke, like, a CEO doesn't get to be a serial entrepreneur overnight. You've got to start with your first company and then your second, maybe third, et cetera. And so there's been an effort to identify maybe hires 5 through 10 of a successful company to be employees 1 and 2 at the next company. An example of that I've seen recently with a cancer diagnostic company that came out of Hopkins, and that's been a great success story locally. But on our team, we took someone on our staff and full-time had her become the senior director of ecosystem development. So a big part of that role is aligning talent to opportunities. It's talent, facilities, policies, funding. It's kind of a big, ambitious role, but talent is a big piece of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think we talk about ecosystem building and development, emerging markets, growth markets, established markets. And so Baltimore was just announced as one of the nation's tech hubs, which I think is a big deal. And obviously this phase 1 for a lot of folks is wow, they're a tech hub. And I think what needs to be clarified to some extent is that this then opens up the opportunity to go and get additional funding as part of phase 2 NOFO, notice of funding opportunities from the government. And 5 to 8 projects, maybe 50 to 75 million, but a super competitive environment, not just here locally and in the region, but nationally. I mean, fixed funds, right? And I think the Fed really wants to make an impact. And so does it end up going with 5 or 8 geographies where they open up and give a little bit less to others is kind of the question that we had. But you've been kind of integrated and involved in Baltimore's tech hub presence. And so we'd love if you could just unpack that a little bit further. And what does that truly mean to you? And what does that mean to FastForward and Hopkins?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to be at least in that first round of, there were hundreds of applications. You go down to 31 cities, and that Baltimore made that list. And then I think that's a nice moment to celebrate. There's an opportunity now for us to potentially get more resources and continue that momentum. Even if a successful award, I think that is just one piece of how we can continue to expand and improve how Baltimore is a driver of innovation, entrepreneurship, commercialization, economic development. I think an important part of that is the alignment of the consortium of organizations that are coming together as part of that application process and that award process, that it's not just one institution, one private sector, one public sector, one university. It's people coming together. There's the adage that it takes a village to raise a child. I often joke it takes a community to raise a startup. And if we're all pulling together, there's this mentality of there could be a rising tide that lifts all ships. And so I think that alignment of different efforts and organizations in the area is also really important. As important potentially as the funding and the awards that may flow later. But yesterday there was a group of folks here today working on that application, and it was a nice, very collaborative effort. And there's a lot of different parties working together, which I think is important. I don't necessarily view other developments or other universities or private accelerators as competition. I think it's all great for the region, and the more that this place is seen as a viable option again for startups and entrepreneurs. I mean, historically, we saw technologies maybe originating out of this area, and particularly out of our university, and then going to what were perceived greener pastures. And whether that was for funding or talent or facilities, you name it, but what can we do to make this area more attractive? There's a sign on the wall over there that says "Start Here," and that was made at OpenWorks, which is another makerspace and co-working facility here in Baltimore. But the goal that we had was, if we can get more companies to start here, and we can bring investors to them, and we can align talent to them and other partners in industry with them, that we can get them to stay here. Maybe you have family. I came here for my wife's job, and that's what got us to move to the area. And now our kids are in the community, and we're volunteering, and we feel a part of the community despite not being from here. But now we're kind of sticky, and we want to stay. And we would love for our companies to be very sticky and want to start here, scale here, and grow here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whether it's real estate and a tenant, or whether it's an ecosystem and talent, among other things, it's the stickiness of the market that I think really moves the needle in the sense of organic growth. Which I think if you look at the historical track record of many core markets over time, it's the organic growth that really is moving the needle. I mean, you have maybe your big pharma come into the market and take on a big swath of space. You might have kind of a celebrity researcher that is constantly churning out, good technologies and passing it on to other PIs that can help, bring it to market or work to bring it to market with kind of the entrepreneurs that are within Baltimore in particular here. So I guess the question then is, when you think about the culture of what you're building at FastForward, and you think about the culture of Baltimore and the sense of identity. I mean, right now with a lot of the virtual environments of which we're working, I would argue that there is a certain level of touch that you have to have for companies and to move them forward, whether it's cell and gene therapy or small molecule or medical devices, right? But I think culture is maybe a fifth pillar.
Yeah.
And so what is the culture, if you had maybe from your personal perspective, boil it down to some core points?
Yeah, I think you want to have a community feeling. I've heard recently from entrepreneurs that at times it can be kind of a lonely endeavor, and you might feel like you're on your own, and it's arduous, it's challenging. But the more that you feel a part of something, the more that you feel like there's a peer group you can call upon, or a resource maybe like a FastForward or a TEDCO or Upsurge Baltimore, where there's mentors and there's staff and there's partners that are willing to help what you're doing, and maybe there's just a place you can go on Tuesday nights to meet up, with the Equitech Tuesdays that Upsurge does, or when we host Anchor Ventures with University of Maryland and Johns Hopkins coming together to pool resources in the community. I think you feel a bit more of togetherness and pointing towards something. It's also helpful from a talent standpoint. If you're the only startup company in town, it's harder, in my estimation, to scale and build a workforce, because what if the company's culture changes as you get bigger or you get acquired, or on the other side, what if you have to downscale or go out of business? What happens to that workforce? We've actually seen where employees have gone from one tenant to another tenant in our space, and when we can connect people to those other opportunities and have this community of entrepreneurs and mentors and investors. I mean, mentors is a big part of that too. That when there's more companies in the area, more people want to be helpful, and then you can bring them together. I think there is a sense of belonging. And I think in the last few years, as we've gotten back to a bit more of that happening in person, you can at times tangibly kind of sense it in the room. You can feel like people are happy to be there together. There's an energy. It's nice. And that's why some of these co-working and shared incubator facilities are attractive, in addition to maybe some of the wraparound services or in our case, very flexible rental agreements and subsidized prices.
Sure. I mean, I think that's a big piece of it. I mean, if you look regionally at Baltimore, it is one of the more expensive markets, particularly for new Class A space. Maybe on a generalized basis, you're looking at $45 rents on a triple net basis. But FastForward really provides an opportunity for scientists and early stage companies to come into a space, have access to shared equipment, shared lab facilities, and kind of grow through different size ranges. And so I think that's really a key component of what, again, allows for that graduation to occur. And the translation of that is we need to build more space. We need more options for real estate. We need more suitable infrastructure, right? And I think that's probably one of the larger gaps, frankly, if I had to knock Baltimore on something.
Sure. When we designed this space, we surveyed a lot of other facilities around the country, private operations, universities. We also surveyed our existing startup founders and university inventors and said, what should we do when we build it? And flexibility was like the common theme over and over and over again. Don't overbuild the laboratories, allow some customization within the space. Don't make them all one size fits all. And we support all 9, soon to be 10 schools of the university and all kinds of technologies. Now, our core focus, not focus, but what we see most prevalent is life sciences because of the nature of some of the research going on at Johns Hopkins. But there is, as you mentioned, kind of a gap between, let's say you're part of here in this facility, and what's the next space that you're going to be renting on your own. And there's a multi-year lease agreement that's typically required, which is at times challenging for somebody who's maybe only funded through the next 12 to 18 months.
Right. Where's the evolution take us? What's next?
So data science and AI is pervasive across industries. And I think a lot of people will think of software first, but there's a huge informatics component in a cancer diagnostic company. There's the wet lab part of it, but then there's a big mathematical and AI and data science part of it as well. You see AI being used in drug discovery now, in drug development, and in all sorts of industries. So I see it being pretty common across different verticals of technologies that will come out of our efforts. We've also recently announced at Hopkins a new data science and AI center where we're going to create 110 new faculty positions, 30 of which will be Bloomberg Distinguished Professors at Hopkins. That's a massive investment in data science and AI at Johns Hopkins that would make one of the largest academic centers like that in the country. So we're all in on that as a tool to continue to advance scientific discovery and innovation and commercialization. So I hazard to guess like that. I get pretty excited about what's the sky's the limit here. I think that's another thing that, we've been doing a lot in a concerted way in the last 10 years since Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures became a real concerted effort with a new alignment of funding and support from the university and others. I think the next 5 to 10 years will be really exciting as we kind of see some of that momentum start to snowball and build upon itself. I started excited and optimistic about this when I moved here about 9 years ago. I'm kind of fortuitous timing there. I remain excited despite some of the challenges and some of the things that we're working through together because I really think there's a ton of potential for this region.
Yeah, we absolutely think so too at Scheer Partners. And obviously we've partnered with FastForward to ensure that we can support companies. And real estate, really at the end of the day, is sort of the third budgetary item right after technology, research, talent, and then facilities, right? And so I think FastForward has certainly done a tremendous job in supporting those options. And there's certainly some pipeline that, in the next 5 to 10 years, as you stated, will really have a dramatic kind of influx of hopefully really strong talent, viability, and vibrancy within Baltimore.
For years, I've seen people from Scheer Partners supporting our companies in their expansion and their growth. And so, when we talked and got to know each other better and learn more, I said that's a great resource to align with our companies, because we want them thinking about what's the next progression, scientific or technology development team, and where are you going to go? I mean, there's this sort of, stereotypical notion of the entrepreneur starting in their garage or their dorm room, or even now, a lot of companies can work remote, but I think at some point you may reach a critical mass where you need physical space, particularly in biotech. But where then is that going to happen? And how do you know? And I'm a huge proponent of working with professionals and not trying to do it all. I mean, entrepreneurs wear a lot of hats, and early startup founders have to do a lot of different things. But in addition to searching the answer yourself on the internet, you can find a trusted professional and someone in the community who could help you. And if you understand the complexities of finding space, acquiring a rental agreement or lease to that space, developing it, the cost, the timeline, working with a trusted advisor and professional, I think is a really important asset. I mean, I'm a former financial advisor, so I'm a bit biased there, but I think, I had one person once, they were talking about, should I be an LLC? Should I be a C Corp? Should I be an S Corp? How do I know? Well, I Googled it. Well, there are attorneys and accountants who will help you with that as well, right? The antithesis to doing it yourself is to find somebody who can help you. And there was once a story about the entrepreneur who became less shy about asking for help, and how he was saying, like, once I got over that, it became a lot easier. And so people, organizations like Scheer Partners can be a great resource and help you.
When you look towards the future, we talked about that a little bit. What do you want people to know?
So Hopkins has historically been a pretty well-known brand name for education, for academic and scientific research and publication, and for patient care, thanks to our large health system. But we haven't historically been known as a place for commercialization and translation of that research, or entrepreneurship. And that's something I want everyone to know, that we're doing this in a meaningful and concerted way, and that we want people within the university, within the community, and across the globe to know that we're very serious about translating the great ideas, identifying the great ideas from our students and faculty, and creating new technologies and companies that are coming out of that research.
Yeah, well, Mark, great spending time with you, as always. Great conversation. We appreciate you for hosting us here today, and look forward to continuing our partnership together.
Happy to do it. Please tell your friends.
We've had the opportunity today to meet with Mark VanderZyl, who leads startup advancement at Johns Hopkins FastForward. Baltimore's emergence as a life science hub still has its challenges, both in the form of talent and space, but something that FastForward has done a tremendous job in starting to solve. As we look towards the future, there's a lot of promise in this city, and we look forward to seeing you next time for BioBlast.